Inside a small storage room behind the main corporate lobby, 8-year-old Sophie Bennett sat tucked in the corner behind 3 wooden crates. Her knees were pulled tight against her chest, and her small hands clutched a flashlight and a sketchbook. Outside the doorway, her mother, Charlotte Bennett, the billionaire CEO of Westbridge Development, stood with 2 specialized child consultants, her voice tight with rising panic. "Sophie, please," Charlotte pleaded softly, her hand trembling on the doorframe. "Just tell me what you need, sweetheart." Sophie didn't look up. She didn't draw. She simply shrank deeper into the shadow of the crates. I walked down the service corridor carrying a heavy metal toolbox, finishing my late-night maintenance rounds. I saw the crowd of anxious adults hovering at the threshold, making the narrow hallway feel suffocating. I didn't ask what was happening. I didn't offer an expert opinion. I simply set my toolbox down, walked into the small room, and sat down directly on the concrete floor, roughly 2 meters away from Sophie. I pulled a small brass screwdriver from my belt. In front of me was a squeaky wheels on a utility maintenance cart. "Well?" I lambered softly into the quiet room, focusing entirely on the rusty wheel. "That is deeply annoying." Sophie's flashlight beam flickered slightly. She didn't look up at my face, but her pencil stopped moving over the paper. "You think it's the wheel or the axle?" I asked the air, keeping my eyes fixed on the bolt. 10 seconds passed in total silence. Then, a tiny, quiet voice whispered from behind the crates. "Too tight." Outside the door, Charlotte froze, tears springing to her eyes. It was the first phrase her daughter had spoken to anyone in 3 long weeks. I simply nodded, loosening the bolt by half a turn. "Yeah," I murmured gently. "Sometimes when things are held too tight, they just stop moving." My name is Ethan Brooks. I am 39 years old, a widowed single father, and a night maintenance supervisor. Charlotte Bennett had all the money in the world to hire the best team on the planet. What she didn't know yet was that her daughter didn't need to be solved. She just needed someone brave enough to sit in the quiet beside her. 3 months before I sat on the floor of that storage room, Sophie Bennett had slowly stopped speaking. It hadn't happened overnight. Following a quiet divorce, a sudden school relocation, and Charlotte's exhausting travel schedule, Sophie had simply withdrawn behind a wall of silence. She communicated with her mother through handwritten sticky notes, delicate architectural sketches, and single-word answers when she felt completely safe. Charlotte Bennett wasn't an indifferent corporate executive who neglected her child. She was an extraordinary mother who was terrified. Charlotte reorganized her corporate calendar. She relocated her executive office closer to Sophie's school. She consulted top developmental specialists and hired dedicated learning facilitators. But the more resources Charlotte poured into helping Sophie return to normal, the more Sophie felt like a broken project that her mother was desperately trying to fix. Every time Sophie went quiet, Charlotte's maternal instinct was to fill the silence with questions. "Are you okay? What do you need? Do you want to go home?" Every question was born from love, but to an 8-year-old girl, every question felt like an exam she was failing. I understood that feeling better than anyone in Westbridge. 5 years ago, my wife passed away, leaving me to raise our 5-year-old daughter, Maya, on my own. 2 years later, I dated a lovely woman for nearly 8 months. Maya grew deeply attached to her, but when the relationship ended amicably, 7-year-old Maya had looked up at me with tear-filled eyes and asked, "Dad, should I stop getting attached to people?" Hearing my young daughter ask that crushed my heart into dust. That exact day, I established one unbreakable rule. Never bring a woman into Maya's world unless I am 100% ready to fight for her to stay. I turned my caution into armor, keeping my personal life completely locked away. I worked the night maintenance shift at Charlotte's corporate headquarters. I took immense pride in my work. I knew every structural joint in the 30-story tower, knew which office doors squeaked, knew which floor heating valves needed attention, and knew exactly when the midnight cleaning crew needed extra supplies. My interactions with Charlotte had always been brief and professional. "Good evening, Ethan," she would say, stepping out of her penthouse suite late at night. "Good night, Ms. Bennett," I would reply, holding the elevator door. Once, when she was working past midnight, I stood outside her glass office and noted dryly, "Ms. Bennett, I am turning off the auxiliary power on this floor in 15 minutes. I am the CEO, Ethan," she countered, looking up from her tablet. "Electricity remains completely unimpressed, Ms. Bennett," I answered deadpan. That was the first time I ever saw her offer a real, genuine smile. After the incident in the storage room, Charlotte walked up to my workbench in the basement. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her polished executive armor completely gone. "What did you do in there, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How did you get her to speak?" "I didn't do anything, Ms. Bennett," I said, wiping grease off a socket wrench. "I just fixed a cartwheel." "She talked to you," Charlotte pressed, stepping closer. "She talked about a bolt," I corrected gently, looking her in the eye. "And if I can offer one piece of unsolicited advice, don't make her single word feel like a national holiday when she walks out that door. If every word she utters creates a celebration, she's going to think her silence is a problem you're managing." Charlotte stiffened, taken aback by my blunt honesty. But deep down, she knew I was right. Charlotte didn't hire me to be Sophie's personal counselor. I wouldn't have accepted the job even if she had offered a fortune. Instead, a quiet, unscripted pattern began to form. On afternoons when Charlotte had late executive meetings, Sophie would sit at a small wooden table near my basement workshop area. I didn't force conversation. I didn't ask her about her feelings or her school day. I simply placed a small wooden box labeled things that need fixing on her table, containing loose cabinet handles, antique toy clock gears, and wooden picture frames. Sophie would silently select an item, examine the mechanism, and watch me work. "Wrong screw," she whispered one Tuesday afternoon, pointing her small finger at my workbench. "Good catch," I nodded, swapping the hardware without making a big deal out of it. 2 weeks later, Charlotte's firm hosted a mandatory 3-day strategic planning retreat at the company's private lakeside guest facility, 2 hours north of Westbridge. Charlotte brought Sophie along, unable to secure her regular caregiver. Because the lakeside facility's auxiliary heating and electrical systems were undergoing seasonal upgrades, I was dispatched to oversee facility operations for the weekend. My daughter Maya accompanied me, as it was my scheduled custody weekend. On the second afternoon of the retreat, a severe early winter gale slammed into the lake valley. Heavy rain turned to freezing sleet, knocking out the main power grid and bringing down 3 massive pine trees across the narrow mountain access road. Local emergency crews confirmed the road would remain blocked for at least 48 to 72 hours. The main resort lodge lost heat, forcing the 4 of us, Charlotte, Sophie, Maya, and me, to consolidate into the property's primary residential cottage, which was powered by an independent wood-burning stove and a backup diesel generator. There were 4 private bedrooms, a spacious central kitchen, and a large living room centered around a heavy stone fireplace. It wasn't an awkward, single-bed scenario. It was forced proximity of a much deeper, more revealing kind. We were 4 people trapped under one roof by a raging storm, 2 single parents guarding their hearts, and 2 young girls trying to navigate their small worlds. As the wind howled against the timber shutters and the fireplace crackled with golden warmth, the invisible walls between our different worlds began to crumble. By 7 o'clock that evening, the lack of electricity transformed the billionaire CEO into a remarkably lost individual in a rustic kitchen. Charlotte stood before the small propane emergency stove, holding a tin of soup and a manual can opener like she was examining an alien artifact. "Need a blueprint for that, Ms. Bennett?" I asked, stepping beside the counter. "I run a multi-billion-dollar international development firm, Ethan," she stated firmly, arching one eyebrow. "I can open a can of vegetable soup." "I admire your structural optimism," I smirked, gently taking the opener from her hands and popping the lid in 3 seconds flat. Charlotte let out a breathless laugh, tossing a linen dish towel at my shoulder. "You enjoy this far too much, Brooks." "Immensely," I grunted, setting the pot over the burner. Across the rug, 10-year-old Maya and 8-year-old Sophie were sitting together in front of the stone fireplace. Maya was busy constructing an elaborate cardboard castle out of leftover shipping boxes, talking at a mile a minute. Maya didn't ask Sophie why she didn't speak much. She didn't hover or offer artificial sympathy. She simply held up 2 plastic toy figures and asked, "Does the dragon live near the bridge or the park?" Sophie looked at the cardboard structure, reached out her small hand, and placed a figure near the folded paper trees. "Near the park," Sophie whispered softly. "Good choice." Maya nodded instantly, continuing her construction without skipping a beat. From the kitchen counter, Charlotte watched her daughter. Her eyes filled with sudden tears, but she quickly turned her face away, gripping the edge of the quartz counter. I poured 2 ceramic mugs of hot tea and walked over, setting one down beside her. "How did you know?" Charlotte whispered into the quiet hum of the wood stove. "Know what?" "How to get Maya through the rough years after her mother passed," she murmured, looking at me with deep vulnerability. I leaned my hip against the counter, looking at the fire. When Maya was 6, every time she got quiet, I panicked. I asked her 100 questions a day because I thought if I didn't solve her grief, I was failing her. One night she looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm not broken, I'm just sad." Charlotte swallowed hard, her throat tight. That night, I stopped asking every 5 minutes, I said softly. I just told her I'd sit on the floor beside her whenever she wanted. It took longer than I wanted it to, but eventually, she came back on her own schedule. "That is a terrifyingly hard thing to do," Charlotte admitted, her voice dropping into a quiet register. "Waiting. Most important things take longer than we want them to," I noted gently. Later that evening, after the girls fell asleep in their adjacent bedrooms, Charlotte changed out of her corporate attire into a comfortable fleece sweater dress, sitting on the hearth bench with her laptop balanced on her knees. I sat on the opposite side of the hearth, sharpening a small wooden carving knife. "Are you going to audit those spreadsheets all night, CEO?" I asked softly. "There are 3 international project proposals waiting for my review, Janitor," she countered smoothly, looking over the rim of her glasses. "My official title is Night Maintenance Supervisor." "Bennett," I grunted. "Show some respect for the facility department." Charlotte let out a genuine, beautiful laugh that filled the quiet room. "You're remarkably brave when we're trapped by a storm, Ethan. You're remarkably less intimidating when you're wearing an oversized fleece sweater," I countered smoothly. A heavy, comfortable silence settled over the room. We looked at each other through the warm amber light of the dying embers. "Can I ask you a personal question, Ethan?" Charlotte asked softly. "This feels like an HR violation in the making, but go ahead. Why haven't you dated since your wife passed?" I paused, testing the edge of my pocket knife against my thumb. "I tried once. 3 years ago. Maya got deeply attached to her. When it ended, Maya asked if she should stop liking people because they always leave." I looked up at Charlotte. I swore I would never bring a woman into Maya's life again unless I was 100% certain she was going to stay. Charlotte stared at me, her hazel eyes softening with profound empathy. "You built a wall around your heart, Ethan." "I built armor to protect my daughter," I corrected softly. "What about you, Charlotte? Why does a brilliant, stunning CEO stay completely single?" "Because my ex-husband told me I solved every problem before anyone had time to ask for help," she admitted quietly, her tone dropping all sarcastic edge. "He told me I was too self-sufficient, that I didn't need him. I swore I would never shrink my capability just to make a man feel important." She looked into my eyes, her silver thumb ring spinning nervously against her skin. "I don't need a man to save me, Ethan. But sometimes, I just want someone who doesn't mind sitting beside me without asking me to be smaller." "A man would have to be an absolute idiot to ask you to be smaller, Charlotte," I murmured, my voice thick with absolute truth. Her breath caught in her throat. The narrow airspace between us felt suddenly charged, heavy with 2 years of unspoken respect and undeniable longing. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the winter storm had cleared, leaving behind crisp blue skies and deep white snowdrifts. Secondary road crews had arrived at the resort perimeter, clearing fallen pine branches and restoring auxiliary power to the main lodge. Inside the cottage, the girls were sitting at the dining table working on a large drawing pad. Suddenly, Sophie tapped her mother's arm and handed her a finished sketch. Charlotte looked down at the paper. Tears immediately welled in her hazel eyes, spilling over her eyelashes. The drawing showed 4 figures standing in front of the rustic cottage: Maya, Ethan, Sophie, and Charlotte. Below the sketch, in Sophie's neat handwriting, were 5 words: "This is the quiet house." Charlotte knelt beside her daughter's chair, her voice trembling. "What does the quiet house mean, sweetheart?" Sophie looked straight into her mother's eyes, her voice clear and steady. "Nobody asks me to be okay here, Mom. You can just sit with me." Charlotte pulled her daughter into a fierce, desperate hug, sobbing quietly against Sophie's shoulder. Sophie wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck, resting her cheek against Charlotte's hair. It wasn't a miraculous medical cure. It was something far better, an absolute breakthrough of love and understanding between a mother and her daughter. An hour later, after the girls ran outside to build a snowman in the yard, Charlotte stepped out onto the covered porch, wrapped in her heavy coat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold air, her eyes bright with emotion. I stepped out behind her, handing her a mug of hot coffee. "She told me I could just sit with her, Ethan," Charlotte whispered, looking out at the snow-covered lake. "All this time, I thought I was fighting for her. I didn't realize I was suffocating her with my panic." "You were trying to protect her, Charlotte," I said softly, resting my elbows on the porch railing. "You were just loving her the only way you knew how." Charlotte looked over at me, her hazel eyes searching my face with electric intensity. "You gave my daughter back her voice, Ethan." "No, I didn't, Charlotte," I disagreed firmly, looking her straight in the eye. "She always had her voice. You just stopped trying to pull it out of her long enough for her to speak on her own." Charlotte stared at me, her breath hitching in the cold air. "Why do you always know exactly what to say to break down my defenses?" she whispered softly, stepping closer to me on the narrow porch. "Years of practice saying the wrong thing first," I smirked gently. Charlotte let out a half-sob, half-laugh. Then her expression shifted into something raw and unguarded. "What if I have to leave, Ethan?" she whispered quietly. I froze. "What do you mean?" Charlotte pulled her mobile phone from her pocket and showed me her screen. An executive email notification was flashing brightly. "Appointment confirmation, Regional Director, Creston Bay Expansion Project." My chest tightened into a cold, heavy knot. Creston Bay. It was a major international development hub located over 1,200 kilometers away on the opposite side of the country. "It requires a minimum 10-month physical residency," she added softly. "I have to give the board my official decision by 5:00 m tomorrow afternoon." My immediate knee-jerk habit flared up instantly. My old defensive armor slammed shut around my heart to protect Maya and myself from potential heartbreak. "That's an extraordinary career step, Charlotte," I said smoothly, taking a deliberate step back toward the cabin door. "You should definitely accept it. You've built your entire life to lead global projects." Charlotte's face went cold. She took 3 fast strides across the porch, stepping right into my personal space until I could feel her warmth in the freezing air. "Don't you dare do that, Ethan Brooks," she snapped, her voice trembling with white-hot emotion. "Do what?" I asked, taken aback. "Don't put on your polite maintenance voice and make the decision for me before I even finished my sentence," she cried out, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're doing it again. The moment things get slightly complicated, you build a wall and push me away so you don't have to risk getting hurt." Her raw, accurate words knocked the wind right out of my lungs. She was undeniably right. I was using nobility as armor to avoid emotional vulnerability. "I have a daughter, Charlotte," I whispered forcefully, stepping into her space. "I swore I would never put Maya through the pain of watching someone she loves walk out of her life." "I am not asking you to be reckless, Ethan," Charlotte cried out softly, taking both of my calloused hands in hers and squeezing them tightly. And I am certainly not asking you to choose between your daughter and me, but you cannot use being a good father as armor to keep everyone out. You never gave me the chance to choose you. Tears stung my own eyes as her confession shattered my remaining defensive walls into dust. I don't want to be just another executive you managed politely, Ethan. She sobbed quietly, leaning her forehead against my chest. I want to know if you are brave enough to tell me what you actually want. I want you to stay. My voice broke, the rough truth tearing past my throat. I want to wake up next to you on Sunday mornings. I want to watch Maya and Sophie grow up together. I am hopelessly, terribly in love with you, CEO. Charlotte let out a half-sob, half-laugh, looking up into my eyes. Took you long enough, Brooks. I didn't wait another second. I reached up, cupped her warm face between my calloused hands, and kissed her. A deep, electric kiss that wiped away 2 years of corporate boundaries and suppressed longing. When we finally pulled back, breathing heavily in the cold mountain air, her phone chimed sharply in her coat pocket. An automated reminder flashed on screen. Creston Bay offer acceptance deadline, 35 hours remaining. Back at Charlotte's penthouse in the city, my knee-jerk habit tried to surface again. If Creston Bay is what you've worked for, Charlotte, you have to take it, I said, staring at my coffee. I refuse to keep you tethered. Charlotte set her mug down with a sharp clack. If you play the noble martyr one more time, Ethan, I will throw hot coffee straight into your face. I blinked. I'm trying to be unselfish. You're deciding for me again, she snapped. I am 36 years old. I am not asking for permission to have a career. I am asking if you are brave enough to build a real plan with me. She was entirely right. I was hiding behind nobility to avoid emotional vulnerability. So how do we do this? I asked, looking her in the eye. No drama, just real life. We sat down with a legal pad to map out scenarios. Option 1. Full-time move to Creston Bay for 10 months. Result. Distance strains a new relationship. Unacceptable. Option 2. Decline the offer entirely. Result. Sacrifices a massive milestone, creating potential resentment. Unacceptable. Option 3. The hybrid executive strategy. Charlotte realized she had assumed a CEO had to physically sit in the expansion office 5 days a week. Why am I running an international firm like it's 1985? She murmured. She counter-offered the board, spending 6 weeks on site for initial setup, followed by a rotating schedule of 2 weeks in Creston Bay and 2 weeks working remotely from Westbridge each month, while promoting Marcus, her senior operations lead, to branch manager. Meanwhile, Charlotte officially transferred my maintenance reporting line to the independent facility general director to eliminate workplace hierarchy conflicts. I also agreed to utilize remote workdays to fly to Creston Bay twice every quarter during Maya's school breaks. We established core relationship rules. 1. No saying I'm fine when something is wrong. 2. No canceling visits without booking makeup dates. 3. Sunday 7 p.m. family dinners with Maya and Sophie are uncancelable. 4. Re-evaluate the arrangement after 3 months together. At 4:44 p.m., 16 minutes before her deadline, Charlotte sat with her phone, displaying her counter-proposal. If I press send, Ethan, we start a real relationship with a 6-week separation. I don't care about 6 weeks, Charlotte. I smiled, wrapping my arms around her waist. I've been in love with you for 2 years while sitting 30 floors below your office. Distance won't stop us. She tapped send. At 4:51 p.m., the board replied, counter-proposal approved. I unlocked my phone, showing her 2 round-trip ticket confirmations to Creston Bay for Maya and me during school break. Charlotte stared in disbelief. You booked tickets before I clicked send? Trying a new lifestyle rule. I smirked, kissing her cheek. Deciding before I'm 100% sure. 14 months later, autumn sun painted Charlotte's penthouse in rich shades of gold. Long distance hadn't been an effortless fairy tale. We dealt with delayed flights and exhausting workdays. In month 3, Charlotte had to cancel a flight back due to an emergency site delay. Maya was disappointed. In the past, I would have shut down politely and retreated behind walls. Instead, I called her immediately, admitted feeling lonely, and booked a flight to visit her the following Friday. Sophie continued to make breathtaking progress. Confident, expressive, and deeply joyful. She and Maya became thick as thieves, filling the penthouse with laughter. Charlotte successfully launched Creston Bay and transitioned back to Westbridge full-time. To mark our 1-year anniversary, Charlotte hosted a small community celebration at headquarters. I walked into the storage room behind the lobby where our journey began. In the corner sat the old utility cart I had repaired that night. Charlotte walked in wearing an elegant emerald dress under warm lamplight. I knelt beside the cart with my brass screwdriver. "Loose will bolt," I noted with a smirk. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Your warranty is thorough, Brooks." 14 months, I grinned, standing up. "I'd say the cart passed inspection." "Too tight," she teased, repeating her daughter's line. Instead of answering, I pulled out a velvet box and knelt on one knee beside the cart. Charlotte gasped, tears of joy filling her hazel eyes. 14 months ago, I sat on this floor to give your daughter a quiet space to be heard, I said, thick with emotion. What I learned was that you were the woman I had been waiting to build a home with my entire life. Charlotte Bennett, will you marry me? Charlotte threw her arms around my neck, kissing me deeply. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes. When I first sat on the floor of that storage room, I thought I was fixing a cartwheel. Building a family isn't about finding a life that never shakes. It's having the quiet courage to loosen the bolts and choose each other every single day. What a beautiful reminder that family devotion and true love are always worth the courage it takes to speak up. Do you think Ethan was right to keep his feelings hidden out of fear of hurting Maya? Or should he have told Charlotte the truth sooner? How can couples better navigate long-distance career opportunities? Share your perspectives in the comments below. If this story brought joy to your heart, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone special.